This story begins in the lumber section of a big box store. It is the story of a knockoff, well, a knockoff of a knockoff. And this double knockoff, my unoriginal creation, is unfortunately my entry into the Rockler Woodworking Challenge. You see, this is the original beautiful desk shelf. Sleek, sexy, inexpensive. I purchased the knockoff version of this, which just didn't match my desk. It was sent back to where it came from, a cardboard box in a large warehouse. Which brings us back to the lumber section of a big box store. It was me that was going to build this desk shelf, and I was going to use a very similar design to the knockoff. This was the plan. The shelf was to have curved corners and its legs asymmetrically spaced. I was going to join them to the shelf with a mortise and tenon joint, something I've never done before. Simple. For you, maybe, but I haven't tried those things, hence the Rockler Woodworking Challenge. Did you forget that I'm doing that? Yeah. I started by speeding up my videos to 2 times as fast, as this is what most successful woodworking YouTube channels do. Then I cut the shelf to 42 inches by 8 inches. And then I used my super cool small camera to get some unique shots, to keep your attention. To add the curved corners to the desk shelf, I created a rounded corner template. I scribed this onto the shelf corners and sawed them off since I don't have a jigsaw. Using the template, I made several light passes with the router until I could fully engage the router bit bearing to the template on the bottom. To create the thicker leg look, I needed to glue the face of each 3/4 inch leg piece together. I cut them slightly oversized so I could later cut them together to the same dimensions. It is typically at the midway point of a video that my woodworking YouTube gurus humbly ask for subscriptions and likes. In the spirit of knocking off, I too shall ask for your subscriptions and likes. I don't feel like I need to necessarily narrate this part, but I feel like you should continue hearing my voice. I cut the leg pieces together on the track saw to even them out to the same dimensions. I did not have double-sided tape, so I used the painter's tape and superglue method to combine these leg pieces together into one giant block to even them out. With this giant block, I sanded them together, which, well, didn't work out as intended. I switched to the orbital sander to complete the job. It was at this point I decided, you know what? I'm going to round off the corners of the legs too, to create a unique knockoff aesthetic. I used the same process as before. Now this is where my real challenge began, a simple mortise and tenon joint. Well, simple for experienced people. I'm a beginner. Just want to make that clear for the Rockler Try That Challenge judges. Starting with the mortises, I drew out some guides on the bottom of the shelf. To find the center of the rectangles, I did a quick Google search and Google told me to draw 2 diagonals across the rectangles to find the center, and so that's what I did. Using a router edge guide, I dialed in where I needed to plunge the router, and since I was routing in a 3/4 inch board, I decided to plunge it just a little over 1/4 of an inch to allow for some wiggle room for the 1/4 inch tenons. I routed out a start and stop hole to avoid overshooting the guides, and then routed out the entire mortise. Given that this was my first time doing this, some of the mortises came out a little wonky. The router edge guide couldn't reach the center of the board, so I used a straight edge instead. Before moving on to the tenons, I double checked that my mortises were just over 1/4 of an inch. Then I caressed all of the mortises to signal to you, the viewer, a job well done. It was now on to the tenons, or as I like to call them, the part that sticks out and goes into the groove. It's just easier to remember that way. I measured the tenons to be 1/4 of an inch in height and 1/2 an inch wide. I laid the leg pieces on their side and did light passes with the router until I got really close to my pencil mark and then tested the fit. And the fit was no good. So I repeated the process again and again and again for each leg piece until I got a nice tight fit. I also had to curve the corner of the tenon to match the curved edge of the mortise. I used a file to do that. And look at that. Some classic and a little sloppy mortise and tenon joinery. Then I did some sanding and of course a little bit of hand sanding and of course the obligatory caressing of my wood. I chose a black stain for the legs because the desk that the shelf will sit on is a different color. That way it would allow for a little better transition in colors. After several layers of black stain on the legs and letting them dry, I spread on some glue and whacked the legs into the mortises. Very satisfying. For the finish, I brushed on 3 layers of oil-based polyurethane. Between layers, I sanded with 400 grit sandpaper and chiseled off some of the dried drip marks. To have earned the reputation of the product or thing that is getting knocked off is a worthy goal to aspire to. I hope that one day I will see the next knockoff generation of my shelf, the double knockoff desk shelf. Sleek, sexy, and unoriginal.